Her wedding ring still shimmered, even as the headline screamed betrayal, and at the same altar where he vowed forever, he now stood with her best friend. 17 affairs, 34 legends. Some you may have heard of, but not like this. Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher, the betrayal that broke America's sweetheart. In 1958, Elizabeth Taylor stood beside a coffin in black velvet, and beside her, the man who would ruin everything. Mike Todd, her third husband and, by all accounts, the only man she ever truly loved, had just died in a fiery plane crash. The cameras flashed, the crowd wept. But as Elizabeth clutched his wedding ring in trembling hands, comfort came in the form of someone else's husband. That man was Eddie Fisher, America's boy-next-door crooner, with a voice like silk, and a wife named Debbie Reynolds. Debbie and Elizabeth had been more than friends. They were bridesmaids at each other's weddings. They shared dinners, secrets, and trust. But grief is a strange doorway, and behind it, something else was waiting. What began as shared sorrow quickly twisted into something more intimate. Whispers turned into headlines. Fisher walked out on his wife and children, and the public fury erupted like wildfire. MGM panicked. Sponsors pulled Fisher's show, and Elizabeth, the violet-eyed darling of cinema, was no longer the grieving widow. She was the homewrecker. They married in 1959, but the public never forgave them. Crowds booed, cameras caught sneers, and beneath it all, the real irony. Elizabeth didn't even love Eddie. Not the way she had loved Mike. In 1962, while filming Cleopatra, she met Richard Burton, and once again, desire eclipsed devotion. Eddie Fisher was discarded just as quickly as he had arrived. His career never recovered. His voice still soared, but no one wanted to listen. Debbie Reynolds, meanwhile, carried the sympathy of a nation, even as she quietly remarried. Years later, she would joke, "We just traded husbands." But the wound ran deeper than humor could hide. Elizabeth would go on to marry and divorce Burton twice, but the damage had already been done. In trying to heal her heartbreak, she created new ones. And Fisher? He became a punchline in a joke he never wanted to tell. In the end, it wasn't the affair that destroyed them. It was the silence that followed. The kind that settles between friends and never leaves. And if that seems messy, wait until you hear what Ava and Frank did next. Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra, the affair that nearly ended him. In 1950, Frank Sinatra had the voice of an angel and the storm of a man who'd forgotten how to pray. He was still married, a father of 3, but the moment he met Ava Gardner, all of that blurred. She was everything the tabloids warned about: seductive, independent, and utterly untamed. Her beauty was the kind that silenced rooms, but it was her unpredictability that drew him in like a match to gasoline. Their affair ignited fast and burned wild. Sinatra left his wife, Nancy, for Ava, in a move that shocked even Hollywood's most jaded circles. Headlines called her a homewrecker. His fans turned on him. Sponsors walked away. Concert venues, suddenly, had no openings. He went from adored crooner to tabloid villain overnight. The pressure crushed him. Sinatra's record sales plummeted. His film offers dried up. At one point, he was reportedly borrowing money just to survive. And still, he stayed with Ava because he believed she was worth it. But she wasn't built for domesticity. Ava was fiercely independent, allergic to confinement, and often just as tortured as Frank. Both battled intense jealousy. Both reportedly struggled to stay sober. Their love became a war zone. Fueled by passion and poisoned by pride, their arguments were legendary. Glasses thrown, doors slammed, silence stretching across mansions like a second roof. But they kept crawling back to each other, because for all the chaos, there was still love, just not the kind that heals. They married in 1951 and divorced just 6 years later. But what happened in between nearly ended him. During their worst period, Sinatra's career flatlined, until one final shot at redemption. He begged for the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity. The studio laughed. Ava intervened. She pulled strings, made calls, and demanded they give him a chance. The result? Sinatra won an Oscar and got his career back, but not his marriage. Years later, Ava said Frank was the love of her life. And Frank? He never stopped loving her. Even after countless affairs and another marriage, he kept her photograph in his dressing room until the day he died. Sometimes, the love that nearly destroys you is the only one that ever felt real. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini, The Letter That Ruined an Angel. In 1949, she was Hollywood's moral compass, graceful, eloquent, unblemished. And then she wrote a letter that detonated her entire image. Ingrid Bergman wasn't just a movie star. She was the face of purity. With roles in Casablanca and Gaslight, she became America's sweetheart. The kind of woman whose photo lived in soldiers' pockets and mothers' scrapbooks. She was elegant, married, a devoted mother. So when news broke that she had fallen in love with a married Italian director, the betrayal felt personal to millions. It started with a simple letter to Roberto Rossellini, a note about artistic collaboration. But when she boarded a plane to Italy, she wasn't just chasing cinema, she was chasing escape from what exactly no one knew, until the cameras found her swelling belly. She was pregnant with Rossellini's child while still married to her husband. The fallout was instant and vicious. Church groups boycotted her films. Politicians slammed her name from the Senate floor. One even declared she was a powerful influence for evil. Life magazine ran features denouncing her morals. The country that once adored her now burned her in effigy. She fled to Europe. Hollywood shut its gates. Sponsors vanished. Fans felt betrayed. And still, she married Rossellini, trying to forge a new life from the ashes of the old. But it wasn't a fairy tale. Their marriage was rocky. She had more children. They made films together. Few successful, most mocked. By the time they divorced in 1957, she had lost nearly a decade of momentum. Ironically, exile made her a better actress. Europe gave her the freedom Hollywood never could. In 1956, she returned to American screens in Anastasia and won an Oscar. The industry forgave her, but many fans never did. The angel was gone. In her place stood a woman, flawed, brave, and utterly human. She broke the image they worshipped, and for that, they punished her. But in losing everything, Ingrid Bergman became something rarer than a star. She became real. Clark Gable and Loretta Young, Hollywood's most carefully kept secret. In 1935, under the frozen breath of the Sierra Nevada mountains, a secret was conceived that would haunt Hollywood for decades. Clark Gable, already known as the King of Hollywood, was filming The Call of the Wild alongside Loretta Young, a young actress with porcelain features and an ironclad Catholic upbringing. On screen, their chemistry crackled. Off-screen, it caught fire. Gable was married. Loretta was devout, and the consequences were unthinkable for the era, especially for her. When Young discovered she was pregnant, panic set in. In the golden age of studios and scandal control, a child out of wedlock could end a career overnight, especially for a woman. She vanished from public view, retreating under the guise of illness. Behind the closed doors of a convent hospital, she gave birth to a daughter. The child, named Judy Lewis, bore a striking resemblance to her father. His ears, his smile, his eyes. And yet, publicly, there was no father. 1 year later, Young adopted her own daughter in a carefully choreographed press release. The cover-up was seamless. Gable never acknowledged the child. Young never breathed a word. To protect the illusion, she even had Judy's ears surgically pinned back, hoping to erase the genetic link. But truth doesn't vanish that easily. For decades, rumors swirled, whispers passed from set to set. Judy grew up sensing the distance, the missing piece. The the lie beneath her mother's smile. It wasn't until 1994, nearly 6 decades later, that the truth was publicly confirmed. Judy released a memoir, sharing the story in her own words. Her mother never officially admitted it. Even then, some wounds run too deep for daylight. The studio system that once built legends had also built walls. Walls that women like Loretta Young were forced to hide behind. Faith, fear, and fame collided in the most intimate of ways. In trying to protect her image, she erased part of her truth. And for years, the daughter of Hollywood's king was raised without a throne or a name. Judy Garland and David Rose, then Vincente Minnelli, 2 marriages, 1 broken voice. In 1941, the girl who sang Over the Rainbow walked down the aisle and into a storm she wasn't ready for. Judy Garland was just 19, America's darling, MGM's golden investment, and barely more than a girl. Her first husband, David Rose, was a respected composer. Older, polished, and already tangled in the music world, Garland was beginning to outshine. Their whirlwind romance was impulsive. MGM warned her. Her mother pleaded, but Judy was desperate for something real. For someone to see her, not just the product they painted onto billboards. Behind the camera, she was already battling overwhelming pressure. Relentless studio control, crash diets, sleeping pills, and stage-mandated smiles. The weight was unbearable, and it only got heavier. Soon after marrying Rose, Judy became pregnant, but the studio intervened. Executives allegedly insisted that a child would ruin her image. Under pressure, she ended the pregnancy and spiraled. The emotional toll was immediate. She returned to set thinner, quieter. Something inside her had shifted. The marriage collapsed, and barely a year later, she fell into the arms of someone who seemed to understand her darkness. Director Vincente Minnelli. He was gentle, artistic, thoughtful. For a moment, she believed she'd found peace. They married in 1945 and had a daughter, Liza Minnelli, who would later carry her mother's torch into fame. But Minnelli came with his own walls. Rumors followed him, ones Judy either ignored or couldn't bear to face. Their home was beautiful on the outside, but filled with silence. Her emotional state worsened. The pressure of fame, motherhood, and personal demons left her exhausted. She couldn't sleep without pills, couldn't perform without them either. Minnelli retreated into his work. Judy tried to hold herself together, but like so many stars of her era, she was being pulled apart. One performance, one prescription, one heartbreak at a time. Their marriage ended in 1951. The damage didn't. Garland's voice trembled more. Her performances became erratic. She was still brilliant, always brilliant, but each song carried more sorrow than before. She spent her life looking for safe harbor in the arms of men, but the truth was, no one could protect her from the storm inside. And speaking of storms, Joan Crawford and Clark Gable made sure theirs lasted decades. Joan Crawford and Clark Gable, the affair that refused to die. In 1931, 2 stars collided on set and spent the next 20 years trying and failing to stay apart. Joan Crawford and Clark Gable weren't just Hollywood royalty. They were fire and steel. When they filmed Dance, Fools, Dance, the chemistry wasn't written in the script. It sparked in the air between takes. Gable, rugged and magnetic. Crawford, ambitious and untouchable. Together, they were combustible. Their affair began quickly, too quickly for the studio's liking. At the time, both were married. Crawford to Douglas Fairbanks Jr., and Gable to his first wife, Josephine Dillon. The public knew nothing, but behind the gates at MGM, everyone talked. And studio head Louis B. Mayer wasn't happy. Crawford was MGM's crown jewel. Gable was its rising king. If scandal broke, the fallout could cost millions. So they buried it. Quiet hotel rendezvous. Weekend trips under fake names. Studio-controlled press junkets designed to keep them apart. And yet, they always found their way back. But what made it truly tragic wasn't the secrecy. It was the timing. Both found love in the wrong chapters of their lives. Crawford would go on to marry again. And again. Gable eventually wed Carol Lombard, who became the great love of his life. Yet even then, Crawford lingered in his orbit. They kept returning to each other like unfinished lines in a script. During quiet moments, on sets, or between films, they'd reconnect, only to drift apart once more. Neither would fully commit, and neither would fully let go. The cost was personal, not public. Crawford, in later years, confessed that the affair had left deep emotional scars. She once said Gable was the only man who ever really understood her, but never stayed long enough to prove it. Gable, for all his strength on screen, was guarded in life. He never spoke openly about Crawford, but those who knew him said her name still stirred something in him. Even years later, their love never exploded. It simmered quietly, painfully, in the shadows of success. And in Hollywood, that kind of love is the one you remember forever, because it never got the chance to break. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, the love that hid in plain sight. In 1942, the lights dimmed on the set of Woman of the Year, but something else had already ignited behind the scenes. Spencer Tracy was a Catholic, married, a father, and burdened by personal demons that clawed at him night after night. Katharine Hepburn was his opposite in nearly every way. Fiercely independent, never married, and allergic to tradition. But when their eyes met across a soundstage, something ancient and immediate settled between them. They fell in love, quietly, deeply, and forever. Their relationship would stretch across 26 years, 9 films, and countless private sacrifices. But Tracy never left his wife, Louise. His faith wouldn't allow it, and Hepburn, she never forced the question. Instead, she stayed in the background, not just emotionally, but logistically, living in separate homes, arriving at events alone, slipping out of frame when his family was near. It wasn't just secrecy, it was surrender. Tracy, for all his brilliance, was a man at war with himself. He battled what close friends described as lifelong depression and an unrelenting pull toward the bottle. At his worst, he disappeared for days. At his best, he lit up the screen with quiet genius. Hepburn bore it all. She once paused her career for nearly 5 years just to care for him during his declining health. She cooked his meals. She sat beside him as he slept. She watched him waste away, not just from illness, but from years of self-inflicted damage. They never married. They never lived together publicly. And when Spencer Tracy died in 1967, just 17 days after filming their final scene in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Hepburn didn't attend his funeral, out of respect for his family. It was the kind of love that asked everything and gave almost nothing back in return. Yet Hepburn never once called it a mistake. She once said, "I loved Spencer Tracy, and I tried to make his life as comfortable as I could." Sometimes, the deepest love stories don't end in marriage or celebration. Sometimes, they end in silence. Rita Hayworth and Prince Ali Khan, the crown that crushed the star. In 1949, Hollywood's most hypnotic beauty traded her silver screen spotlight for a diamond tiara, and it nearly destroyed her. Rita Hayworth wasn't just a movie star, she was an image. Painted lips, scarlet gowns, and a dance that could stop time. But behind that image was a woman born Margarita Cancino, molded by studios and aching for something real. When Prince Ali Khan, the dashing, jet-setting son of the Aga Khan, entered her life, it felt like the fairy tale she'd been denied. They met in Cannes, among whispers of champagne and camera clicks. He was aristocracy with a playboy reputation. She was wounded from her third failed marriage. And yet, they fell into each other's arms as if trying to outrun their pasts. The world watched with obsession. Their wedding was a spectacle of silk, scandal, and diplomacy. Rita, the American bombshell, now a real-life princess. But the dream began to fracture almost immediately. Ali Khan wasn't done chasing women. Rumors swirled of affairs, late-night parties, and secret rendezvous. Rita, now isolated in European high society, struggled to adjust. She didn't speak the language. She didn't fit the mold. She had left behind the only world that ever truly understood her, and in return, she was given a cold palace and colder nights. Worse still, the marriage sparked a bitter custody battle over their daughter, Princess Yasmin. Rita fought tooth and nail to bring her child back to the United States. She was tired, heartbroken, and reportedly battling deep emotional strain. The woman once adored by millions was now being dragged through foreign courts, begging for the one thing in her life that still felt pure. They divorced in 1953. Rita returned to Hollywood, but something had changed. Her performances were still captivating, but her spark had dimmed. The emotional weight of betrayal, isolation, and loss left behind a sadness that never fully lifted. Rita Hayworth once said, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but they wake up with me." But with Ali Khan, she didn't wake up at all. She vanished inside a fantasy that had no place for her reality. Lana Turner and Lex Barker, the secret her daughter couldn't keep quiet. In 1957, Lana Turner swept into Hollywood parties like a goddess carved in satin. But behind her mansion doors, something was shattering. By then, Lana had lived a dozen lives. Discovery at a soda fountain, whirlwind fame, failed marriages, public heartbreaks, but none of it prepared her for what came next. Lex Barker, her fourth husband, seemed like the right choice on paper. He was tall, handsome, and fresh off playing Tarzan. To the public, they looked like a dream. Behind the scenes, the nightmare had already begun. Turner's daughter, Cheryl Crane, just a child at the time, later accused Barker of repeated abuse, claims that were hidden from the world until Cheryl herself could no longer hold them in. At first, Lana reportedly refused to believe it. Denial is a powerful drug, especially when the truth is too horrific to face. But after confronting her daughter and the man she called her husband, Turner took action. Barker was immediately expelled from their home. The marriage ended. The headlines hadn't even begun. The scandal devastated Lana publicly and privately. Her career, already turbulent, took another hit. Studios were wary. Tabloids circled. She wasn't just a star anymore. She was a mother in a house filled with broken trust and unanswered questions. And then, the unimaginable happened. Just 1 year later, Cheryl, still only 14, stabbed and killed Johnny Stompanato, Turner's mob-connected boyfriend, during a violent altercation. The case ruled it justifiable, a moment of protection, but the headlines were merciless. Lana Turner became a permanent fixture in the tabloids, not for her films, but for the chaos inside her home. Behind the makeup, behind the glamour, was a woman fighting to keep her child safe and trying to keep herself from falling apart. Barker's career never recovered. The accusations stuck. He faded from the limelight as quietly as Lana tried to rebuild hers. But the scars remained, etched not only in gossip columns, but in a mother's memory and a daughter's silence. Finally broken, Lana Turner wore elegance like armor, but even armor cracks when the danger comes from within your own home. Gloria Swanson and Joseph P. Kennedy. Singer, the power, the passion, the silence. In the roaring 1920s, she ruled Hollywood from behind velvet curtains and camera flashes until she fell for a man whose last name would echo in American politics forever. Gloria Swanson wasn't just a silent film star. She was a force. With coal-lined eyes and a commanding presence, she captivated audiences without ever speaking a word. But off-screen, she was ambitious and vulnerable to the right kind of charm. That charm came in the form of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., a wealthy financier with a growing empire and a hunger for control. At first, it was business. Kennedy managed her finances, helped fund her independent production company, and guided her through an industry in transition. But behind their business meetings and strategic phone calls, something else was growing. They began a passionate affair, one kept fiercely secret. Kennedy was married with 9 children, including a young son named John. Swanson, though independent, was deeply entangled, emotionally and professionally. She trusted him, she depended on him, and in the end, she paid the price. Kennedy made sweeping financial decisions in her name, decisions that left her production company teetering on the edge of collapse. By the time the affair ended, Swanson was not only heartbroken, she was nearly bankrupt. The public never knew the full story. Not then. The Kennedys were protected by power, wealth, and a reputation they carefully curated. Swanson was left to clean up the wreckage, while preserving what little of her image remained intact. Hollywood moved on. So did Kennedy. But for Gloria, the betrayal ran deep. She would later reflect on the relationship with a mix of regret and realism, acknowledging how completely she had given herself over to someone who ultimately saw her as a stepping stone, not a partner. It wouldn't be until decades later, after Kennedy had helped launch one of the most powerful political dynasties in history, that whispers of the affair returned, quiet reminders that behind even the most polished names lie secrets that never died. She was the queen of silent film, and yet, in the end, the most devastating part of her story was how little she was allowed to say. Audrey Hepburn and William Holden, the love that couldn't grow. In 1954, on the glittering set of Sabrina, two of Hollywood's brightest stars shared more than just a camera frame. They shared a longing neither could fully name. Audrey Hepburn was rising fast, graceful, elegant, with a kindness that seemed untouched by fame. William Holden was already a star, handsome, rugged, and quietly troubled beneath his confident grin. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable, but it was what happened off camera that left a deeper mark. They fell hard, quiet walks between takes, subtle glances across crowded sets, private dinners laced with possibility. Holden was married, but estranged from his wife, and for a moment, he imagined starting over, with Audrey at the center of his new life. But Audrey wanted children, a family, a future that Holden knew he couldn't give. Years earlier, he'd undergone a vasectomy, something he reportedly kept from her until it was too late. When she found out, the fairy tale cracked. Audrey ended the relationship, heartbroken, not because she stopped loving him, but because her dream couldn't live in his reality. She went on to marry actor Mel Ferrer and have a son, trying to build the stability she never had growing up. Holden never got over her. Friends said he kept a framed photo of Audrey on his desk for years, that whenever he spoke of her, there was a pause, just long enough to hear the regret behind the smile. But time was unkind to Holden. He reportedly struggled with the bottle, and his once sharp charm began to erode. Roles became fewer, his health worsened, and as his star dimmed, that missed chance with Audrey loomed larger. They worked together again on Paris when it sizzles, but the spark had changed. The warmth was still there, but so was the silence between them. Some love stories never get their final scene. They flicker on set, echo in quiet moments, and leave two people forever wondering what might have bloomed if life had just looked a little different. Bette Davis and Howard Hughes, The Billionaire, The Books, and The Broken Vow. In 1938, a man stood in divorce court and told the judge his wife was leaving him because she read too much. But behind that bizarre excuse was a secret far juicier and far more dangerous than any novel on Bette Davis's bookshelf. At the time, Davis was one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. She'd already won an Oscar, battled Warner Brothers in court, and carved out a career on her own terms. Her marriage to musician Harmon "Ham" Nelson had started with promise, but fame, as always, complicated things. As Bette's star rose, Ham felt smaller, his ego shrinking under the shadow of her spotlight. Enter Howard Hughes. The eccentric billionaire, aviator, and Hollywood playboy had a habit of collecting beautiful, brilliant women, and Davis was no exception. Though never publicly confirmed at the time, those close to her said the two began a secret affair. Hughes was fascinated by her intensity. She was drawn to his mystery, his ambition, his impossible wealth. Nelson, already insecure, suspected something. He snooped, gathered letters, and finally filed for divorce. But rather than accuse Davis of infidelity, which might have triggered a public scandal, he made a peculiar claim that she was more devoted to books and scripts than her husband. The press ate it up. The court granted the divorce, and the affair with Hughes soon fizzled. Whether it was distance, personality, or Davis realizing she couldn't be tamed by even the richest man in America, it ended quietly, just as it had begun. But the fallout wasn't so quiet for Davis. Though she maintained her power in the industry, the scandal chipped away at her carefully guarded image. She would marry 3 more times, none ending peacefully. And while she never directly acknowledged the Hughes affair, she didn't deny it either. In later interviews, she hinted at regrets, at missed timing, at knowing how easily power and passion can warp into control. For a woman who played strong-willed heroines, her real life was often a battle to stay one step ahead of heartbreak. And for a man like Hughes, she wasn't just another conquest. She was the one who refused to orbit him. Mary Astor and George S. Kaufman, the diary that brought Hollywood to its knees. In 1936, newsboys shouted headlines usually reserved for wars and elections because Mary Astor's diary had just gone to court. Astor was known for her poise, her grace, her quiet strength on screen. She'd worked her way up through the silent era, transitioned into talkies, and built a reputation for sophistication. But off-screen, her marriage to Dr. Franklin Thorpe was collapsing, and their bitter custody battle over their young daughter would expose far more than parenting disputes. At the heart of the trial was a small, handwritten journal, Mary's private diary. In it, she detailed a series of romantic encounters with Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright George S. Kaufman. Their affair, once known only within Hollywood's Whisper network, was now stamped across every newspaper in America. Thorpe, seeking full custody and public sympathy, threatened to read passages aloud in court. He painted Astor as an unfit mother, trying to weaponize her past into a verdict. The scandal exploded. Reporters camped outside the courtroom. Headlines screamed phrases like "Purple Diary" and "Hollywood's most scandalous pages." Even international events were pushed off front pages to make room for every juicy detail. But Mary didn't crumble. Instead, she stood her ground. Dignified, calm, and unapologetic. She acknowledged the affair but reminded the court that a mother's ability to love her child had nothing to do with who she had loved years before. The judge agreed. She won joint custody. Yet even with the legal victory, the emotional toll was staggering. Her reputation was bruised. Studio executives distanced themselves. Roles became harder to land. And for years, even as she gave award-winning performances, including her legendary role in The Maltese Falcon, the public still associated her with those leaked diary pages. Kaufman, for his part, never publicly addressed the scandal. He returned to the East Coast, his career largely untouched. Astor carried the fallout. She once wrote, "There are 5 stages in the life of an actor. Who's Mary Astor? Get me Mary Astor. Get me a Mary Astor type. Get me a young Mary Astor. Who's Mary Astor?" But when her private thoughts became public property, she didn't run. She redefined what resilience looked like in a town built on image. Marlene Dietrich and John Gilbert, The Siren and the Forgotten King. In the early 1930s, Marlene Dietrich could walk into a room and silence it. John Gilbert used to own the room, until his voice cost him everything. He had once been the leading man of silent cinema, a matinee idol with smoldering eyes and a presence that melted screens. Greta Garbo, Norma Shearer, he'd starred opposite them all. But when sound entered the picture, Gilbert's stardom crumbled. Some blamed his voice, others the studios. What mattered was that his reign was over, and he knew it. That's when Dietrich entered. She was the rising European star, mysterious, seductive, untouchable. They met at a time when Gilbert was already spiraling. Rumors followed him, troubles with the bottle, mood swings, public outbursts. But Marlene saw something else. A man who had once ruled the world and now sat in its ruins. Their affair was intense, almost defiantly private. Dietrich, never one to conform, reportedly tried to help revive his career, pulling favors, offering support, urging directors to cast him. But Hollywood had already turned the page. Studios didn't want Gilbert anymore, and being attached to him made Dietrich a liability. Executives warned her. Friends whispered, but she didn't care, at least not yet. Their time together was brief, but emotionally charged. Gilbert, humiliated by his fall, reportedly grew more volatile. Dietrich, balancing her skyrocketing fame with a man losing his grip, eventually had to walk away. The pressures of her own rising stardom left little room for saving someone who no longer wanted saving. In 1936, Gilbert died of a heart attack at just 36 years old. The official cause? A weak heart. But those who knew him said it had been broken for years. Dietrich never spoke publicly about the affair, but she kept a framed photo of Gilbert in her home until the day she died. He was once the face every woman dreamed of, and the name every man envied. But in the end, the spotlight that made him a legend was the same one that refused to follow him into the sound era. Kim Novak and Sammy Davis Jr., the love that defied Hollywood's color lines. In the late 1950s, beneath the glittering studios and red carpet premieres, a forbidden romance sparked between Kim Novak and Sammy Davis Jr., a love both soulful and scandalous. Kim Novak, blonde, elegant, and Columbia Pictures' rising star, had it all: beauty, talent, and the studio's full backing. But her world was carefully curated. Enter Sammy Davis Jr., the multi-talented, charismatic black entertainer whose voice, dance, and charm lit up stages and screens alike. They met at a private party, Kim in soft silk, Sammy in sharp tuxedo, and something electric passed between them, silent but undeniable. Their connection was poetic but risky. Pre-civil rights America was still steeped in deep prejudice. Hollywood executives, desperate to maintain Kim's pristine image, forbade any public hint of their romance. And threats weren't just professional. Sammy faced whispers, and rumors hinted at violent warnings if he didn't step back. Studios pressured Kim. Mob-connected figures pressured Sammy. The tension pressed on them like heat before a storm. Behind closed doors, their dates were filled with laughter, shared dreams, and whispered confidences. But every stolen embrace carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Kim's studio boss, Harry Cohn, reportedly reminded her that her career, and even her safety, depended on silence. Sammy, caught between love and self-preservation, agreed to step away. When their liaison ended, both emerged changed. Kim's career continued, but she often spoke of that love with lingering regret. Sammy went on to break barriers in entertainment, but he remembered the woman who saw him, not the color of his skin. A new film, Scandalous, is now being made about their story, bringing to life a romance that defied Hollywood's most rigid lines. They loved each other in an era that refused to love them back. Their story remains a haunting reminder that the most beautiful romances sometimes bloom in the harshest soil. Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, a love that began in betrayal. In 1944, she was just 19, with one line in a movie, and he was a married legend twice her age. But when their eyes met on set, Hollywood's most forbidden love story began. Lauren Bacall wasn't even supposed to be in To Have and Have Not. She was a model with barely any screen experience, chosen for her sultry looks and quiet confidence. But from the first take with Humphrey Bogart, sparks flew. Not the kind the studio could script, but the kind that upended lives. Bogart was 44, gruff, iconic, and still married to his volatile third wife, Mayo Method, a woman known in gossip columns as Sluggy, for reasons that hinted at fists, not fondness. Their marriage was a battlefield, but Bacall offered something Bogart hadn't felt in years: calm, admiration, and a kind of youth that didn't mock him for aging. It adored him for it. They tried to hide the affair at first, but on the Warner Brothers lot, secrets never stayed quiet for long. Rumors roared louder with every scene they shot. Bacall would later say, "No one thought it would last," especially not Mayo, who allegedly threw plates when she found out. The tabloids had a field day. Homewrecker was the polite term used. Bacall was painted as a manipulator, Bogart a midlife cliché. But when Bogart finally left Mayo and married Bacall in 1945, the whispers didn't stop. They just shifted. Now people asked, could a scandal survive the spotlight? Turns out, yes. Their marriage wasn't perfect. Bogart struggled with the bottle, and the pressures of fame rarely paused. But they found something real in the wreckage. He called her Baby. She called him Bogey. They made more films, raised children, and became one of the few Hollywood couples whose love story felt less like PR and more like poetry carved out of chaos. When Bogart passed in 1957, Bacall never remarried a love like his. Because some romances don't come in twos, even if they start in scandal. In a town built on illusion, theirs was a truth that began with betrayal and somehow ended in devotion. Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles, the marriage that changed her image forever. In 1943, Hollywood's greatest bombshell traded stardom for intellect and nearly lost it all. Rita Hayworth, Columbia's fiery redhead and wartime pinup, was the girl every soldier carried in their coat pocket. When she married Orson Welles, the brilliant wunderkind behind Citizen Kane, it seemed like the perfect union, a collision of beauty and brains. But behind the wedding bells was a storm that neither fame nor fortune could calm. Welles immediately took control of her image, her education, and her art. He dyed her hair platinum blonde for the lady from Shanghai and urged her toward highbrow roles that clashed with her glamorous public persona. Studio boss Harry Cohn hated the change, claiming Rita should never have to renounce Gilda. The film flopped, and so did the marriage. Whispers began. Welles was unfaithful. He carried on affairs, reportedly even one with Judy Garland, while Rita wrestled with her own growing pains. She reached for the bottle, struggling to cope with betrayal and constant pressure. Her emotional unraveling became painfully visible in private, even as the cameras kept rolling. By 1947, the divorce papers were filed. She walked away from the man she described as her greatest happiness, the home they never made, and the career she would rebuild. Welles moved on swiftly, his affairs and wanderlust well documented. He never paid much for Rita's support. She bore the tab of reinvention and heartbreak. And yet, something remarkable happened. When Rita returned to Hollywood, she stepped into a new era. Freed from both Welles and Columbia's chains, she embraced roles that showcased depth and resilience, eventually earning enduring acclaim and empathy. In the end, she lost a husband, a contract, and a sense of self. But she found her true power and taught us all what it means to rise again, on your own terms. Fame built them up. Love, scandal, and silence nearly broke them. And yet, even now, their stories still shimmer. Fragile, human, unforgettable. If these legends moved you, don't let them fade again. Like the video, Subscribe for more hidden chapters from Hollywood's past and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because behind every glamorous frame was a heartbeat the world tried to forget.